I gave this presentation at the Minnesota Applied AI conference recently, and I thought it might be nice to record it for other people. So this is about prompt engineering, specifically prompt engineering using pipelines or using the API, not just using the ChatGPT interface. So this is um, places where you're going to be using it programmatically. You're generally going to have one shot to solve the task, right? If you have like an interactive discussion, the prompt can kind of get you partway there, and then you can chat your way to the final destination. But here the prompt's going to have to work because you, the developer, won't be there anymore. When you are using the API, you get complete control over the prompt and over history and all the context. And you also control and manage this state. And hopefully, whatever you're doing is going to be embedded in some kind of product or something that has a clear audience. You know why you're doing it, you know why you're putting it out into the world. So I'm going to talk about defaults, what GPT does when you don't tell it anything specific, planning and thought processes, how to get it to um, go deeper, be a little bit more explicit about how it's making its choices, about the order, especially the order of output and how in the order you ask for output, about information extraction um, and examples, and how I like to think of examples as transformations, and about discernment, about rubrics, about getting it to decide things. I won't talk about writing code. There won't be any code in this. None of the code is complicated. Really, the code is one of the easier parts, and it's kind of old school programming in a lot of ways. Um, I won't show any human in the loop kind of concerns. They're really interesting. That's a whole another thing. Uh, Prompt hacking, very doable, and the inputs I show are easily hackable. Uh, I would suggest you only try to trust the output as much as you trust the input. So if you let anyone give you input and then you publish that on the web, that might not be a good idea. But if you let someone give input and you only show them the output, then it's probably fine. All they can do is mess up their own experience. We're not going to use functions or tools or structured output. Those are great things to use, but kind of another that's a way to get deeper into it. And we won't compare LLM models. We're only going to use GPT and actually GPT-4 Turbo. We're not going to use 4.0, which just came out. Most of this stuff applies to all the other models as well, but it's a lot to take on all at once. And this isn't a comprehensive overview of prompting. This is what I personally have learned and how I approach prompting. This is what I spend a lot of my time doing in my job and in a lot of hobbies as well. So this is some of what I've learned, not just like stuff that's been grabbed off the web. Um, and for this, we're going to actually do an example. So we're going to write a historical overview of something. So to do it, we need a subject. And in the presentation, I asked for ideas from the audience. I can't do that here, but I can do it here. We got a 6. That is a weird 6. And I, ahead of time, asked for a few different things. So the Byzantine Empire's Macedonian Renaissance. Intriguing. Don't know much about that. And I'm going to make it even more detailed. So we're going to ask for another role here. Get an 8. And here are like subject areas, so rituals and ceremonies. All right. And we will run the prompt here. Now, if you look at this is an application that I've developed as part of my experimentation. It's not actually open anywhere. I use it at work, but it's a nice way to show things. You'll always see these prompts showing up over here. This is a full prompt that's being sent to GPT. This is made up of a couple parts. The system prompt is where the idea is this is what the developer is telling to GPT, like the system that it's embedded in. These are the instructions for how you behave in it. And then the user prompt, this is typically where you would put the user's message. I won't do that ever, and I never do that in any of my work. If the user puts in input, I always wrap it or make it more explicit or contextualize it. But at least it might be a little superstitious on my part, but I usually put general instructions in the system prompt and then more like a command in the user prompt. So this is what we get back. The brilliance of the Byzantine Empire's Macedonian Renaissance, a flourishing of art and ceremony, 9th through 11th century. Very, very picked up on that title, pretty clear, though added a little bit of a flourish. Now, if you we look through this, I think you would probably recognize this as kind of your standard GPT API output, right? It has an introductory paragraph, has a bunch of headers. The language is going to be a little bit flowery at times. Um, so when you're doing something, you should decide why are you doing it, right? What output do you want? If you just give the GPTs or any LLM's default output, someone could have just gone and made that output themselves. Uh, you should have some sort of idea, opinion, thing you're working towards. Um, and just in general, I think sometimes people say like you don't need prompting or it will not be, it'll go away. And prompting isn't just like a way to get the right answer; it's a way to get the answer that you want. And there's ways to express that, and those are important. As an example, this is a friend of mine, Nora Murphy Johnson, made this. She makes instructional things where she describes some of her processes, and she likes to make this AI artwork to go with it to kind of make it more interesting and kind of complement it. And this was one that she made an illustration of personal power. And she has like kind of standard prompts that she adds to her things to give it a feel that's consistent across her work. But I thought, as an example, I will take this idea of illustration of personal power and put it into Dolly. And here it is, a brand new, also completely original picture that you have never seen. Uh, but also you have all seen it. This is the header image to countless AI thought pieces, and it just hurts my soul when I see one of these. So, put a little effort in, try to come up with quality, try to come up with something like this, and just the world does not need this. Like, if this is what you make, just don't share it with anyone because nobody needs it. It's useless. Sorry. And this is kind of an example. Like, this is a default. I didn't tell it what to do, and so it just did the defaults, which for some reason often picks up on like those self-help magazines about spirituality that you find or something. So we don't want to just do that. Now, if we look at the article that we made, uh, we didn't actually say much about it, right? We didn't say uh, anything. If I could look at the actual prompt here, what was this is the prompt we used. We didn't say anything except use engaging language, emphasize unique aspects, uh, and you'll be writing a historical overview. We didn't say what kind of thing. We just said a markdown document, right? It could be a school book essay. It could be any number of kind of places. It could be a pamphlet. We didn't say anything. Now, what we did a little bit say is we said you are a history teacher. So probably what it picked up on is that like maybe you write a textbook article. Um, so we could try here. I'm running several different prompts. This is you're a mediocre middle school student. It's otherwise the same. You're a history teacher, and you are a BuzzFeed author. So we're going to let these prompts run and kind of see how that affects the output. All right, that completed. Took 30 seconds or so. Usually the amount of time these things take is relative to the total output, and I probably should actually say I'm going to put that in there just to try to decrease the overall um, length of these, as it's not that important. So here we go. Here's the BuzzFeed version, the dazzling heights of the Byzantine Empire. Here is the history teacher version, fairly similar to the one before. When I think about how much things change without changing the prompt, I think of that as stability. And there's going to be a lot of changes in this because we haven't told it very specifically. And here's a mediocre student, which I think if you look into it, you'll be like, that wasn't actually very mediocre. It's actually quite hard sometimes to get GPT or an LLM to be ignorant. Though we'll come back to that a little bit. Um, so roles, very frequently described, pretty weak. They really like the difference between those articles was quite minimal. And you could say like you're a kindergarten teacher and it will change it and stuff, but you have to like exaggerate it to get much of anything. Much better than roles is audience. And sometimes the role is just actually talking about the audience, but indirectly for some reason because you didn't talk about the role. So we are going to add to this, and we're going to come up with a audience idea. Number 7, I don't want graduate student. It's too academic. It wants to be, okay, I'm going to be, one more role, and then I'm going to pick something. Number 4, PhD candidate. That's even worse. Um, construction worker. Construction worker is, and it'll give them an interest too. That makes sense. Okay, so now we are going to recreate this, and each of these ones, it says your audience is construction worker who is interested in building processes. And so we'll see how this affects content. All right, now we can go to our new ones here. So this is the BuzzFeed version, the Byzantine empires. So you'll see probably some additions. Ceremonial construction. Some of this might be more explicit than you want, right? Maybe you have a persona, but you don't necessarily want to address a person directly. So you'll have to think specifically about how exactly you want to describe that. Here's a history teacher. Um, Also very explicit. I also reduced this to one page in this one. So, and the not very mediocre student. One thing I will note is what I will call the Chekhov's gun bug. Chekhov was a playwright, and saying if you have a rifle hanging on the wall in the first act, it should fire in the last act. Or in other words, if you put something compelling into the scene, you should make use of it. It's breaking a promise with the audience if you don't do that. GPT has that same idea when it looks at a prompt. If you have something in the prompt and it's a detail, and the stranger the detail, the more the LLM will be compelled to make use of it. So if you say something like, if you have a persona and you put the persona in there and it has a specific interest, if the interest doesn't connect with it at all, it's likely it's going to go to great lengths to try to do it anyways. And again, if it's strange, it will be like, well, you must have put it there for a reason, so I'm going to do something with it. So be a little careful with that. It also is one of its powers. Um, I also want to talk. We won't talk a lot about a lot of theory here, but LLMs are built on the transformer architecture. There's this very famous paper that introduced the transformer architecture, and this is what the architecture looks like. But we're only thinking about one thing, which is these attention heads. So the way GPT works, or any of these transformers, is it doesn't just look at the prompt. It gets to decide what to pay attention to. And whatever it looks at in the prompt will become magnified in terms of the importance to how that output is created. And then the rest is kind of dampened. Right? So one of the important things it's doing is that it is deciding what to pay attention to. And then additionally, each time it produces output, it also gets to move those heads. So it gets to pay attention to something different. And it can, move through instructions, identify things that way. And and it can do multiple ones. But one of the important things is that it can also pay attention to the output it has already created. So essentially, once it starts writing output, it's now created a prompt that's something that will be used in the same way the prompt is used and to create further output. So if it writes something down, it can refer back to that. It can think ahead a little bit. It doesn't just wander forward exactly one little bit at a time. Not a lot, but specifically by writing something down, it can then refer to it. It can make a plan. One of the ways that this comes up is a frequently talked about technique, chain of thought. This was early on in GPT. They found if you just asked a simple math problem, it would often get it wrong. But if you said, let's think step by step, it would get it right a lot more often because it would write out a bunch of instructions and follow through those instructions to come up with an answer. Another way to sometimes think about this is giving it room to think. So you might just say, write down your thoughts, analyze this first. Um, that ability to think in a bit is something that it can then refer to before it comes up with like an answer. And in our case, a document is the answer. So let's add a plan. So here we have a new prompt. It's very similar to the old prompt, but with this addition. Begin by planning out the article inside plan tags, then follow with the markdown document. So these plan tags, this isn't like anything special, but what I'm going to do is it just makes it easier when it has the output. I can extract the plan, and that's not intended to be part of the document, right? It is not the thing you're going to present to people. And then the thing that follows is the actual thing you want to present. So let's look at the result here. And we'll go to the first result now. So this just shows what was inside that plan tag. So you see it's like an outline, introduction, building, and then it's going to follow this outline down here. It can help make things more structured. But we just let it do defaults again, right? This is a problem with chain of thought in general. Like, sure, chain of thought is better than no thought at all, but we didn't actually tell it anything. Like, if we look at this prompt, we said begin by planning out the article inside plan tags. Well, how should you plan out the article? We didn't give any indication. It decided on an outline, which is the most obvious direct way, and sometimes that's good, but again, it's always going to be doing the most obvious thing, and you want to be careful. Is that really what you want? So the way I like to think about it as like the next level up is, again, don't leave it the default. You have an opinion. Try to make use of an opinion and give it a thinking template, right? Instead of just a plan, give it an idea about how to make the plan. And so this is an extended prompt that uses this technique. So here, all the same, begin by doing inside plan tags, but here is how you should make your plan. So first, exciting details. So we want it to like be exploratory. Like I want an article that is, there's lots of things you could cover, but I want to like, this should be punchy. It should be like, what are some really cool things that come out of this? The hook, which is one exciting detail picked from above. So here we're letting it kind of like be expansive in its thought. And here we're trying to get it to be specific, to say like, okay, I'm going to pick out the best one, hopefully. And again, you might want to have more criteria here um, about what makes something the best idea out of those previous ones. You might also want more criteria here about like how to be expansive in your thinking. Um, Here's preferred format, which is one that I don't consider like fully successful here, but if I was going to like make this into a really good prompt, I think I would spend a lot of time on this portion of it, which is here I'm trying to like get it to change the format of the article based on what is actually in it, right? So um, it might make sense to have like little pretend news clips in some things. It might be make sense to have like timelines in other ones. It shouldn't all be the same format. It shouldn't just be like a paragraph, header paragraph, header paragraph. This is a way like to elicit some more creativity, and then finish with the normal stuff. Make a background and outline. So let's look at the result of this, which is already completed. Here it is with, okay, so here's some exciting details. If you look at these, a concrete boom in architecture. I don't know. Maybe some interesting. It's such, these are some things that like connect with some of what we've added here. And here the hook I think is not as specific, which is often a problem. So you have to like really push GPT to be more specific and not just like the blend of ancient building marvels and the rebirth of classical traditions, right? That's the kind of blah you get out of here. So sometimes often you have to like push harder when the default really is going to draw back to this like blah. So here we have some stuff. I like that it's now it's got some buildings, it's got techniques. So it's I think this is a bit of an improvement, and there's a lot of prompting that could be improved on it. Um, so one thing to think about in general, and this specifically, is how order matters. So GPT can only write forward, right? As it's writing this thing, it writes these words, and then it writes these words, and so on and so forth. It cannot backspace. It cannot make revisions. It can and will write itself into a corner, and a lot more if you invite it to do so via the prompt. So this is an example from my own work where we tried critiquing math problems using GPT, and we had a prompt, roughly like this: critique this math problem. And this would be the kind of response we would get. Right? It would say, this math problem has an incorrect solution. It has written this down. Does it actually know that it's incorrect? Eh, it has a guess. And then you give it, and then I asked for an explanation. And so after it made this guess that it was incorrect, then it came up with an explanation. So it's going through here. You can substitute things in, and we say 4 times 2 plus 2 equals 10, 8 plus 2 equals 10, which is false. Well, no, that's not false. That's true. But it's too late. It already said it was incorrect. And so it is struggling with deciding whether to be correct here or to be consistent. And you'll find it often chooses to be consistent rather than to be correct. The other thing that I'll say is really wrong with this prompt is starting off with critique. Right, we've already said, I am asking you to find problems. Now, it's not, in theory, you and I know that like critique you should be able to come through and be like, oh, maybe that's not that interesting, but it's correct, you know. But GPT, when it sees something and its desperate desire to be agreeable and helpful and do what you say, if you ask for a critique, it will come up with a critique. So you have to be careful and use neutral language when you don't want it to jump to things. Another place where order matters is if you ask for a document. So you just ask for a document. Document begins with a title. That means that everything in the document will come from that title. It will write the title, and then it will write the document that matches that title. Now, a normal human thing is that we write a document and then we decide on the title, or maybe we have revisions or something. But we don't become slaves to this first part of what we authored. Um, this actually has a pretty simple solution. Don't ask for the title first. Ask for the title to come last, even though you might present it first. And you should always think, how do you want it to produce the content, and separate that from how you expect to later present the content. And if you look at this planning one here, I've tried to do that by having it first come up with exciting details and then pick an exciting detail, right? If you have it pick something but you don't have it enumerate them, then it's not really picking, it's just inventing one thing. Um, and you want to think about that general order and what derives from what. Now, if you wanted to make like really terrible clickbait content, you probably actually want to start with a title and then you want to write the document because you don't actually care. But you shouldn't do that because that is horrible and people who do that are bad. So uh, you should think about what you want to produce first, and also you should make clickbait content because that's terrible. Um, so I want to go back to the middle school student because that is also an example of planning in some sense. This is a general trick that I found. I don't know who shared it with me, but they were right. If you want to have a strong stylistic output, one of the great ways to do it is to first have it describe what that style is like. And so here I've asked, begin by describing how a mediocre middle school student would write the paper, put in the description inside description tags, and then write it. So I have not run this prompt yet, so this is the very first time we'll see it. So here, with basic understanding, they include general facts. The Byzantine Empire had a time called the Macedonian Renaissance. That is a terrible sentence that is very actually correct for what I've asked for, which happened from the 9th to 11th century. Ah, that's also terrible writing that I asked for. So like this is actually pretty good. This is pretty good bad content. I have not tested whether putting this into the prompt itself is different than having it invent this directly. That would be an interesting question for someone to do. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit of a change of pace, and we're going to ask, is this history true? So famously, hallucinations are an issue. So we're going to make an actual pipeline here. So instead of asking it to make up facts, which is essentially what we did, we are going to ask it to find facts. So here I have another prompt. You're a history teacher, blah, 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 blah. You'll start by looking up articles on Wikipedia that relate to the subject. And then I just give it how to do that. And so here's a list. I actually expected when I wrote this that it would have a much better knowledge of articles than it does. Like exact titles. I kind of thought it would have memorized exact titles, but it doesn't. But it's fine. So what I do then on the back end, I look for this list. For each item, I do a search on Wikipedia using their API. I get the top match, and then we use that page. So here is, this one has a number of duplicates because it just has Macedonian Renaissance over and over. And this, as a result, it ends up being a little bit smaller, just 600K, where often a megabyte is common. But this is a bunch of useful um, useful bits of data or facts that we can pull from. So now we have the articles. We have to actually make them facts. So one way we could, or something smaller, we can't include that whole thing. So here we're just going to summarize each of these. So if we look at this prompt, um, you'll be given a possibly relevant Wikipedia article, and here I use a pattern where I just like include all of this in one user prompt and then put the command to the next one. It's kind of like quoting. Um, and this is something that not every LLM is actually cool with, but I kind of like it. All right, let's see the result. If we look down here, so this is the Byzantine Dark Ages. Here it is. You'll notice something if you just like look through this. There's a little bit of a default. I didn't say much about the summary, I believe. I think I said, wait, which is the, I guess 3 paragraphs. But it's like exactly 3 paragraphs. I said 3 paragraphs or less. That is something that will not work. If you ask for like a certain number or less, it will always do the certain number because it can and it does. And you also look; these are all about the same size, right? It didn't make short paragraphs. It just made it's like a sort of default that's in there. Um, so we have these summaries, and let's look a little bit at some of the content of the summaries. So here is, facts from Master of Ceremony. That's the Master of Ceremonies plays a pivotal role. Well, that's intriguing. 5th century Catholic Church. This is just general stuff about. This is not actually that helpful for what we really want to make. And in general, I'm going to say don't ever use summarize. You might use the term as you talk about it, but you should not use it in the prompt, and you should not let that be how you do it. Um, you want to extract the information that's relevant to your task or to the user's task. So if you're providing them, like if you were summarizing news articles, hopefully you would have some idea, some knowledge of the user, some like, or you're like doing financial things or something, and then and you're going to give it guided ideas of the kinds of information you want to pull out. Summary leaves everything to those defaults, right? A lot of the length about what important is and what it means, about the format of the result, all those things. And of course, to connect with the user's task, you also have to know your user. And I would encourage you not to think generically about your user, but think really concretely about them. In our case, though, GPT is our user. So I guess we'll think about that. So let's try extraction. Um, so here we are doing a prompt that says, make a list of the relevant facts in the Wikipedia page. Actually, I made a mistake here that I meant to fix and did not. Well, first, there's no grade level, but when you're doing something like this, especially with like lots of content, we should say this subject is very important. This is like the key to the whole thing. We say it up here. If it's really important, you should say it at the top and you should say it at the bottom. Again, great thing you can do with your API and with your manual prompt construction. Do it at the prompt or do it at the top and do it at the bottom. So, well, these are some of the facts. I'm going to run this again with the new prompt that includes that thing at the bottom. Oh, let's see how long this thing is. And we'll give it a little comparison as well. All right, so here we have facts. This is the new prompt, and this is the old prompt. I have to look through carefully to decide how much it changed things. But here, yeah, I think if we look through it, we actually would find that the selection of facts has improved through that change. All right, now the examples, I also said not a ton about these examples. Now we don't necessarily have to tweak this. This might be fine. I'm going to show how to use examples to kind of refine the output. Um, so what I think really GPT is best at is using these as transformations or translations. In this case, like how do we translate input to output? In this case, the input is the kind of basic prompt context. The source material, because we're generating a fact, right? So we have this big source material, though we don't necessarily have to show the entire thing to do an example. And then the output is a fact in our ideal format. Um, and how I think about this is that we've described an algorithm to it, right? We've shown it here's your input and here's your output, and there's some sort of hidden algorithm that translates one to the other, and it can kind of follow that. It can infer that algorithm using the example, and it can pay attention to all those things. It can kind of lockstep through these things and say like, here was the input, here's the output, here's a new input. I'm going to make the new output. So all those kinds of attention heads can move forward and do that. Um, so this is a great place to use ChatGPT, and I've already done some of this. Um, so I came up with a different topic, I believe. Um, and here's a um, might have lost the topic, though it's probably one of these ones up here. And here's a paragraph that I pulled out from a Wikipedia article, and I asked it for some facts, and then was like, be more brief, and then you can eventually edit these down to exactly what you want. And then put that in a prompt. So here's one where I've done it. This is I guess the scientific revolution. Um, this is one that I ran previously and came up with this, and then came up with a specific fact based around this, or a specific set of facts that I thought would be useful. So let's try this one. All right, so now we have new facts. Um, Hopefully these are like, I tried to select these to be a little bit more compact. See the formatting is a little more consistent, though it adopted this little header that I included in my example. And yeah, some of these things might actually, might be better at failing over on these things. Um, so that's how I usually approach examples, is just kind of custom making something um, and doing that. So now I have a lot of facts. We actually have less facts in this example than I've had in most of the previous runs of this with different examples. But generally, there's like too many facts. Well, often some of those articles weren't very useful, and it may or may not have left out the facts for those articles. And there's probably duplicate facts. So how would we, improve that input? Um, One idea might be to give all of the articles at once. Um, Now, that might be too big for the context window, especially some of the largest ones. It actually won't be too expensive, probably, because for the most part, you pay for the amount of input, and if you spread the input over 10 prompts, you're going to just pay the same amount as if you put it all in one prompt. Um, but asking it to prioritize across that is really difficult. It might be able to search within something that large, and in some ways, fact extraction is a kind of search, but to have it actually prioritize top facts, I think it's going to be too much. We could improve the decision process. In some ways, we did that when we changed this prompt here um, to, you know, well, you know, just this little thing is increasing the decision process, right? This is saying something about how to do the decision process. Um, there's limits, right? Because we want the idea that you can have a diverse set of inputs. You can ask for all kinds of historical contexts. And it can be hard to make good instructions. But also, if you're doing this decision process across many prompts, it doesn't have access to all that. So it's only going to be able to compare things inside of its one result set, right? So maybe one of the pages isn't that interesting, and it dives deeper into prompts. Maybe one is interesting, and it might be more, might not include as much as you want because of that. Another thing might be to do scoring. That is very hard trying to come up with numbers. Now, if you ask it, score everything on a ranking of 1 to 5 or something, it will do that. It will happily do anything you ask it to do. It just, they won't actually mean much. If you give it natural language descriptions, it'll be a little bit better, right? You'd have like rank this as either very good, good, not good, and bad or something. And it might be good at that. Um, a little bit better, but still not that good. It will reinterpret those, and it probably will be consistent inside one run with how it decides to interpret that, but you haven't given enough information for it to kind of be objective across different extractions. Um, Also, it'll tend to exercise the whole thing. So if you ask it to do scores from 1 to 5, it'll feel compelled to give something a 1 and to give something a 5. It's just like you just give it that space, and it feels the need to use that space as part of its like desperate agreeableness. Um, so much better is like which is better or which of these is best. In fact, if you wanted to do a ranking system, like an objective like 1 to 10 ranking system, what you would do is you would have to come up with specific examples for each level. And then essentially you'd be saying, is this example better than this? Is this thing that you found better than this other thing that I'm giving as an example at level 7? Is it better than one at level 8? Right? And that's how you're going to have to give it to actually come up with those numbers. Um, but pairwise criteria comparisons, and if you give it some criteria, it's great at. And so you want to like think about how you can do that as much as possible. And if you want to do prioritization, it's pretty good at that. Um, it doesn't know when to stop. Again, like I said, like if you say 3 or less, it'll always do 3. You know, but so we're going to use this version. So if we look at this, we basically say your history, blah, blah, blah. Same thing. Here is all the facts from all the different ones. So this is smaller than the content of the pages, but relevant facts. And then we ask, create a numbered list of 20 facts, starting with the most important. And this will give us facts down here. So here's like our complete facts that we would use as input. And we've done here, what we've done is something kind of like RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which is to say we have retrieved information, Wikipedia, and we're going to be augmenting our final prompt, which is to make an overview. And so here is the final prompt. It includes all the facts and the planning that we had below, and tries to incorporate them all into one, hopefully better thing. And if you feel like, and you can start to use more things, right? Like if you felt like you really have done a good job of getting all the necessary facts, you can start saying like, don't include other facts, and you can really reduce hallucination, or you can have it even refer to facts or pick out the exact facts that it's going to use, right? You could use that in the outline. So down here it is, some details, a hook, again, still that kind of vague hook, and this. And unfortunately, this is actually a much more boring. I'm unimpressed by the result, but one thing I will say is that when you're doing this, you are going to like struggle with some of these prompts, and like maybe the problem was in one of these earlier parts of the pipeline that's not producing examples. Like these facts maybe are a little bit dry, and it's picking up on the dryness of those facts and creating something dry in the output. Um, so you have to have a certain amount of faith and keep working at it to really get it working. And then lastly, we're going to just repeat it again, the whole process with the summarization instead of with the thing, and see how that compares. All right, the whole thing is completed, and you see I created the summaries again, and then actually created a summary, combined summary of all the summaries, and here's the final document. It did create like a different style here. This one's like, unfortunately, the previous one was not very good, but I think that you would, if we look closely in this, we would find that it has some very strange decisions about what kind of input it used or what kind of things it talked about, which is based on this kind of poorly contextualized summarizations going together. Um, so that is the end. I hope that this shows some ideas about how to make things with GPT that are worth existing in the world, that are of some quality. Um, each of these things you're going to want to like struggle with and experiment with the prompts in order to really make them work. But you really can. There is a lot more capacity for quality output from GPT than I think sometimes people realize because there's a lot of people who are really lazy with their prompting and they do not create good quality content, but unfortunately they create very high volume content. So may you put out the kind of content that you want to use, or anything. All the prompt techniques I've used here, while they've been used for content production, are actually very applicable to a really wide variety of tasks. So, thank you.